There's no doubt that many industries are increasingly turning to AI solutions, and private equity firms are no exception. From enhancing deal processes to optimizing portfolio company management, there's never been a better time to explore how your firm can leverage these tools, and this exciting topic brings us together today. Today, we'll discuss real-world examples of how private equity firms are using AI tools, key benefits of adopting AI solutions to stay competitive in the evolving market, and practical strategies for firms preparing to drive value with AI. Before we dive in, let me take a minute to familiarize you with our webinar platform. During the webinar, you can access resources and relevant links through the resources panel. If you have any questions, you can submit them to the Q&A, and we'll follow up with responses from our experts after the webinar concludes. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website along with other industry-focused webinars to view at your convenience later. Now let's get started. I'll give a brief introduction and then have our panelists introduce themselves before we dive in. My name is Eric Hawkins. I lead AI and engineering at Ontra, where we're building the AI-powered legal operating system for private markets. My background is in computer science and engineering, and I've been working in enterprise SaaS for the last 20 years with a heavy focus on AI in recent years. Joining me today are Richard Lichtenstein of Bain & Company and Lisa Larsson of StepStone Group. I'll let our panelists introduce themselves before we jump in. Richard, let's start with you.
Great. Hi, Eric. Hi, Lisa. Thank you for having me. I'm Richard Lichtenstein. I'm an expert partner at Bain & Company, the consulting firm. I have a couple of hats that I wear that are related to this. One is I'm our chief data officer for our private equity and investor consulting business. I lead a team of about 120 people, and one of the things we do is we build lots of interesting tools using Gen AI internally for Bain to help support private work with private equity funds. And then also I co-lead our work commercially with private equity funds. And so I've probably discussed Gen AI with, probably 130 funds, done projects with about 50, probably, 70, 80 projects on Gen AI. Wide range of things. Some of it is in diligence, some of it is in portfolio, some of it is helping firms make their own operations more efficient. So really, since ChatGPT launched, all I've been doing all day, every day, it feels like, is Gen AI for PE. So excited to be here.
Great. Thanks, Richard. Lisa, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eric. Nice to meet you, Richard. I'm Lisa Larsson. I'm a partner at StepStone. I lead our portfolio management team. So we are actually data scientists that wear a little bit of the kind of investment hat as well. And normally our day-to-day is kind of top-down understanding various topics across private markets. So risk, return, liquidity, fees, valuation, and then just using all of those tools and models to build thoughtful portfolios and manage them. When Gen AI came to the scene a couple of years ago, people are like, well, we need some data scientists who also know something about our business to take a look at this. And so we had the pleasure of digging in on that. And so we were also kind of working on generative AI topics at StepStone, which is honestly very complementary to the topics that I mentioned before, if surprising. So pleasure to be here today.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. And exciting backgrounds, and it's going to be a fun conversation. I was thinking maybe a nice place to start for the audience would be just at a high level to talk a little bit about AI strategy at your firm. So Lisa, if you wouldn't mind jumping in, just at a very high level, before we'll have plenty of time to get into details and examples, but how would you depict the StepStone AI strategy?
Yeah, so our strategy involved mainly how we think about developing this skill set at StepStone. And so, there's the option to kind of hire a bunch of people who have PhDs and have done kind of neural networks for the last, so many years. And then, set them loose on GPUs. So that's one option. You kind of hire all your resources in-house. And then there's kind of a hybrid option where you use kind of data scientists who maybe know a little bit more about the business in combination with, external vendors to kind of come up with a hybrid solution. And the third one would be just to have kind of external vendors. And so external vendors, I think it's too early days to actually go that route. So we obviously are in contact with a lot of our startups. So we have a broad VC platform, and we love kind of, working with them. So not just, investing in them, but also working with them where possible. And our understanding is that, we kind of can't go that route just yet. So to fully just outsource your large language models, it's just difficult to kind of bridge the pure technology to the use cases that you have internally and get kind of the software optimized so that your internal teams can efficiently use it. And it's a good kind of, cost save for them, time save for them. So the other option is, of course, to have a bunch of kind of geniuses in a room somewhere and tell them to like go find some GPUs and test some things. And I think that a lot of kind of huge organizations like large banks and so on, they had a lot of infrastructure around this already, like before ChatGPT kind of graced the world. And so like they could just repurpose a lot of people they had internally with some of those skill sets to take a look at generative AI. StepStone, we didn't have kind of a large department of PhDs sitting around. So we actually chose the middle option. So we were looking around at our startup community, and what we found was that, in terms of the infrastructure side, that was something that we could actually leverage part of our startup network for. So what we wanted data security, like everybody, and we wanted to, just have all of our data kind of all of the infrastructure kind of in-house still. So we use Amazon Web Services for our platform. And what we found is an external startup who was basically like creating kind of all of the infrastructure, but in-house for people. So they would do it for us. They would do it for kind of other people. And that basically looks like, anything that we would need to run large language models and test various things, they could set that up. And then, our data scientists could just be let loose on that platform. And so in terms of optimizing GPU costs and making sure kind of the data is kind of protected and has all the necessary controls around it, like that is something that we focused on. And so I think we went with the hybrid strategy because it really used our internal resources that we already had. And really large language models, I'm sure, Richard, you'll agree, like you don't actually need kind of to have studied deep neural networks for the past 15 years to get started with the large language models. This is an area where really a data scientist can, just get their hands on kind of APIs and so on and get started and make an impact. So that's kind of a little bit of a snapshot of the way we went. And again, like really in-house, Amazon Web Services, it's all kind of on our usual platform, as well as, we're using kind of the OpenAI through Azure. So I think a lot of people kind of just went that route because, there's uncertainty around, a startup, OpenAI, and the Azure platform gives you access to the same models, but through kind of a more secure setup that's very well understood by kind of our legal and compliance and so on. And that seems like a common industry choice.
Great. Richard, maybe a little bit of a different question for you. I mean, happy to hear Bain's strategy directly, or maybe if you wanted to just share sort of what you're seeing with the PE firms you're engaging with.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll maybe try to touch on both briefly. So I'll briefly talk about Bain, and then I'll get to the PE firms, which I think is probably more interesting to your audience. I mean, I think for Bain, our journey, I think, Lisa, looks similar to what you're describing with sort of the large bank version of it, right? Which is we do have a lot of people, a lot of engineers floating around already building things. And so once Gen AI hit the scene, we just basically had them stop doing everything they were doing and just build lots of Gen AI related things and built a bunch of Gen AI tools very quickly. For example, we built our own kind of internal knowledge management tool using Gen AI called Sage, which has been very popular. And we built a number of tools to do analytic functions, which I can talk about later. We don't need to get into detail on it now. But we started building a bunch of stuff. We had actually had a Bain. We were very lucky. We happened to have a partnership with OpenAI before ChatGPT even launched for various reasons. And so we were in a good position to start working with this technology very quickly and building a bunch of stuff when the other options that Lisa mentioned didn't exist, right? When there weren't any startups and there weren't any when you could go higher. And so it's just like we had to figure it out ourselves. We wanted to move quickly. And so that's what we did. As Lisa pointed out, I think we've found that, smart, curious engineers can build stuff with this technology very quickly, right? You don't need a lot of specialized training or expertise in the way that some previous new technologies have required, which has been great and one of the reasons we've been able to move quickly. But again, I don't think, Eric, as you said in your question, you really care that much about what we're doing at Bain & Company. You care more about what PE firms are doing. Now, the PE firms, even the larger PE firms generally, don't have that many engineers, or have some of them have no engineers, but have very few people. I mean, even unless you're talking about the absolute biggest PE firms in the world, even a very large one might only have a handful of data scientists who work at the firm. So they're not really in any kind of position to start building anything, building and maintaining anything, right? And additionally, that's not their only consideration. Internal fund operations is by far their like tertiary consideration, right? What I mean is, when this revolution happened, the first thing every fund was thinking about is, oh, geez, like, do I own any companies that are now going to go to zero because of Gen AI? Because like Gen AI is just going to do what this company does. Like, that's my number one concern. Number two concern is, are there any companies sitting on a huge opportunity that I should go do something with, right? And then number three is, how do I make sure that any company I buy going forward, I dodge any kind of Gen AI landmines and think about how to underwrite, right? Like, those are the top concerns. How do I make my fund use Gen AI to be more efficient was not really a big concern for at least the first half of 2023, or maybe 2/3 of it. Now that we're in 2024, there are more tools available. The tooling has gotten better. Funds are starting to think harder about this. I've seen a few approaches. I've seen some funds that have adopted ChatGPT for Enterprise and are doing some interesting things with that. And again, I can talk about that later. I've seen some funds that are trying to adopt knowledge management platforms. I think that's one of the areas where the tooling has gotten very mature. And so there's real opportunity for funds to adopt that and get benefits. Again, we can talk more about that later. Then I see occasional tinkering with other types of tools and startups and so forth. But most of the activity, I would say, is around either ChatGPT for Enterprise or knowledge management platforms at the moment. There are other, obviously, like bolder strategic initiatives that many funds have, but that's where they're starting.
Okay, great. Appreciate the overview there and the insight. You have a unique seat to be able to sort of look across the landscape and talk with multiple firms. Maybe just following on from the high level strategy, the next click down. Let's get into a couple examples, and we can leave it fairly open ended. So maybe Lisa, like what are some recent examples where you all have been using AI and just a little bit about the impact? And we'll go, more focused later into, the different topics of deal sourcing and IR and everything like that. But what are some recent examples at StepStone?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for us, we wanted to stick with things that are straight down the fairway for large language models. So large language models, they're good at summarizing information. They're good at finding information. They're just like, if you say, hey, I want to look for this, they can find something similar to this pretty easily. And so searching for information, summarizing information, these are like two things that, you can kind of find a lot of use cases related to that. The other one is getting structured data from text. So I think for us, there are use cases where we just have literally text data. We need to find 3 data points. You kind of open and close a lot of documents. It's one of these things that's just an operational nuisance because it takes time and it's not uplifting work, let's say. And so, being able to put some structure around just a simple user face around here are the documents I need to look through. Here are the data points, the 3 data points I need to find. And now, here's a simple user interface that allows you to QA the data that's coming out and approve it. I think things like that have actually kind of saved a lot of time. I would say that the best use case for us has actually been coding. So, I mean, Richard, you mentioned you have 120 in your department. A lot of those guys must code, and you can agree with me in saying that actually, like things like GitHub Copilot has been a complete game changer when it comes to like the time spent on coding tasks. I think for us, we're getting at least like 1 extra day a week out of this kind of technology, just because it makes it so much easier to kind of add pieces of your code in, just saying like, I need to do something like this, and then you'll get kind of a draft that makes sense in the context of what you were working on. So yeah, coding, I would say, is maybe not as interesting for the rest of the audience, here, but for anyone looking to actually use generative AI, I'd say that, if you have any coders in your firm, look at that first, because it's actually really useful. And, then, yeah, finding summarizing information. I think that, like the data scraping example is a good one. We also have kind of a chat bot. So we were spending a lot of time finding information, especially newer employees, on, HR topics, on compliance topics, on, what our IT policy or what our expense policy is. And that is something that everyone firm-wide needs. And, instead of emailing an HR person who will like have a canned response because they're used to getting so many emails about that, you basically just put the frequently asked questions behind a chatbot, and then they can very easily find that information. And so you can kind of, direct them to a central portal where they can find a lot of the things that they're looking for in one spot. And, the people who are normally sitting around kind of answering some very basic questions have a lot of free time to do higher value tasks. I think that's been great. And then summarizing documents, we are a just document heavy industry. I mean, a lot of the communication comes through, through text, through emails, through, quarterly reports, through these kinds of things. And so I think anytime that, we internally just need to kind of summarize information or even search for information in a variety of documents for any sort of part of our business, I think that is a really good use case for generative AI.
Richard, any recent examples you want to share about where you've had success?
Sure. I mean, Lisa just listed so many wonderful examples, and I won't repeat those. I'll try to build on them. So I think a couple of things I will call out. One, I think is really interesting is, so the coding copilot, totally agree that is the first and kind of furthest along use case, right? I think at this point, if you talk to any coder or developer at any company, they're using it in some form or another. I mean, I've even heard of crazy examples where companies tried to ban it, and then people would bring in laptops from home so that they could have, could have the personal laptop alongside their work laptop and get the code. I mean, so it's here. Everyone's using it, whether you like it or not, and it's great and it's helpful. What I think is going to be really interesting is the next generation of this is actually not about, I mean, obviously it'll get better and better, which is nice, but also automating or at least creating first drafts of a lot of the other aspects of the software development lifecycle, such as documentation and code review and things like that, right? Because most developers, the thing they hate the most, the worst part of their job, is the non-coding part of their job, right? They hate writing long documentation, writing long user stories, like all these sorts of things are, I mean, I'm sure not, I don't want to generalize, I'm sure there's some people who love that, but the most developers I talk to, that's not their favorite part of their job, right? And Gen AI is going to be really good at those parts as well, right? Of reading code and documenting it and et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think like many of the Gen AI applications that we've seen, it's important to think about them. I mean, it's important to think about them like an intern, right? They're like interns, right? They're great. They're super helpful. The more guidance you give them, the better what you get back. But ultimately, it's an intern. You're not going to take what an intern gives you and just hand it to your boss and say, here it is, it's done, right? You're going to want to read it, revise it, and make it better and maybe iterate with them a few times before it's done. This is still the case with the coding copilot. AI generated code still has bugs in it. It's going to be true of the documentation, but giving people those first drafts will make them a lot more productive, right? And so I think that's a use case that I think is just coming to market. Some of those firms are just starting to introduce those features, but I think that's going to be a big story in 2025 in terms of where developers pick up the next kind of level of productivity. In terms of stuff I've seen today that works, I mean, a couple of things that we're using at Bain that are really working are we've built a bot that allows you to summarize calls. So basically, if you do, we'll do a diligence. And again, this is very relevant to PE firms because they do all these calls too, right? We do a diligence. We go talk to 50 customers, 100 customers of the target. We can take all those transcripts and put them into this system, which we call Dialogue, and it allows us to do all kinds of really interesting things. And because we kind of custom built the system, right, it does the exact workflows that our teams need, right? So you can put in, here's a list of questions I'm interested in, and it will tell you what did everybody say in response to those questions. Or you can say, I'm looking for a quote about X, Y, and Z, and it'll find the 3 quotes for you and put them in the context of the full speech, because you can't just take it. You want to make sure it's not hallucinating, right? So you can see this is the nice content quote for me to use, but also here's where it fits in the paragraph and so forth. Those tools are great. We've used them on hundreds and hundreds of cases. And we have a couple of other examples of tools like those that have been used a lot. And those have been, and again, Lisa, those fit into your examples of, in that case, it's very much a sort of summarization example. I think in terms of what use cases, again, beyond those that I see, in the early days that I see funds doing, the only other example really is knowledge of stuff that's live happening today, not kind of future, is knowledge management. There's a number of knowledge management tools out there, third-party tools. There's a wide variety of them. There are some that are sort of general purpose vertical solutions. There are some that are highly tuned for PE. There are some that are tuned for specific PE use cases, et cetera. I don't really want to name names and get in trouble here, but we've tested a lot of them and I have a lot of opinions if you talk to me afterwards about which ones I like best. But I've seen funds adopting a wide range of them with mixed, with varying levels of results. But the ones that have had good success are able to achieve, Lisa, sort of what you described, where they can have, I'm starting a new deal on X. I want to figure out how I want to get smart on this topic on X. Let me, and you can just sort of type some of the right stuff into the tool and it'll say, okay, great. Here's a perspective on this company. Here's a summary of what we know about this company. And it's based on, maybe they did diligence of that company 3 years ago. Maybe they diligenced a competitor of that company a year ago. Maybe they did a credit offering by another company in that space 6 months ago, right? All that data comes together to give you a nice summary of what you know. That previously would have taken somebody a day to put together at least. And they probably wouldn't have even found all those different data points I'm describing in the organization because the organizations are too siloed. So that's the kind of thing that I think we're seeing, again, very early days on. But again, I expect to see 6 months, a year from now, a lot of funds will have systems like that and they'll be working.
That's great. Yeah, super good examples. I was gonna ask specifically about deal sourcing and diligence processes and what you've seen. So maybe, you've already sort of dipped a toe in those waters here, Richard. What either putting on sort of a forward looking through the looking glass, what do you see ahead, or what do you see currently working as far as deal sourcing and diligence, and maybe just like double click a little bit into what's going on behind the scenes. Like, how do those systems compare to what existed before?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, I think there's a few different ways I could take it. So if we just think about the process, I would say that there's a few key use cases that funds have. One of the key use cases is this sort of get smart use case, right? Of, I have a new business or a new sector and I want to figure out, get smart on it quickly. And this is vitally important, right? I'll talk to funds who will tell me, I have an associate, they'll look at 20 different companies before we find one company that we want to go further with, right? And each of those 20 companies they look at, it could take them half a day to a day to run to ground. So that means that someone's spending practically a month working before they find one company we want to go forward with. If you don't have to believe that's going to happen, you don't have to believe, oh, that's going to be go from a day to 5 minutes, right? If you just believe that instead of looking at 1 or 2 companies a day, they can look at 3 or 4 companies in a day, right? So it's still a multi-hour process, but a shorter process. You've now just saved a lot of time, right? And you can then take that time however you want, right? You could do more deals, look at more deals, be smarter about the deals you do pursue. I mean, there's lots of ways you could bank that time that gets exciting, right? So that's I think a big source of where companies want to go. Now, there's a few ways you can kind of get there, and I think again now we're getting a little bit into what we'd like to have happen, but isn't fully quite there yet, right? Which is, so I already talked about the idea of using your existing knowledge base to kind of come up with information, but there's lots and lots of other third-party data out there that you could also imagine pulling in, right? At sort of the basic level, you could imagine pulling in a bunch of third-party research reports, right? There, from investment banks, but also from lots of, the specialized IT report providers, if it's a tech company, industrials report providers, et cetera. So pulling in third-party reports, that's again sort of an easy use case. Today, that's quite hard to do because you have to negotiate with each of those report providers to make it happen. But I see signs that'll get resolved eventually, right? And so that's kind of just the same exercise, but now you're just pulling from a slightly larger, high-quality pool of data. Then I think there's the sort of quantitative analysis, which becomes kind of interesting and more nuanced. So as an example, we built a tool at Bain, right? And I think this is the same idea of what I'd imagine PE firms want, is we built a tool that you can put in a company and its competitors, and it'll scrape all the reviews for this company. And those could be consumer reviews, but they could be B2B software reviews too, right? Anything. It'll scrape them. It will classify the sentiment of each review, or even of each part of a review, if they say multiple things. Classify the sentiment both in terms of positive, negative, but also category. And then it'll make cool charts that show, and you don't have to tell it the categories. It'll just come up with the categories, right? And it'll make cool charts that show, here's how each company stacks up along these different dimensions. And you can quickly see, the company we're looking at, there's a lot of people complaining that's too expensive, or a lot of people are saying it's really easy to use. And that's, and so this stuff all just sort of pops out of the view. Today we can run one of those analyses in like 20 minutes, and it's all automated or mostly automated. That used to be something we had a team doing that took 2 days, 3 days to do, right? I mean, it was a very manual process. So if you can do that in 20 minutes, right, you say, okay, well, why not do that in 20 minutes for every asset? And while I'm at it, read through every blog and news article and summarize what they're saying and see if there are any red flags there. So that's another point. Then you say, well, let's pull in a bunch of ESG data and see, are there any ESG red flags or things that we want to watch out for in this company, right? And there's a bunch of sources you could do for that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? You can imagine pulling in more and more data sources to get a more and more automated view of the company. And again, in that early stage, you're not trying to figure out, do I go spend $100 million in this company? All you're trying to figure out is this worth spending another couple of days on, right? And so you can find being able to quickly figure that out, right? Find the red flags that would say this deal doesn't fit with our fund and our thesis, or green flags that say this is a great idea, we should go ahead and do it because it does these things that we really like. Finding those faster, again, creates a lot of efficiency. So I think on the sourcing, that's where it's going. I feel like I've been talking for a long time, so I won't belabor the other use cases, but I will say the other couple of tantalizing things that funds are excited about that feel, to be honest, slightly further out are, having bots write investment committee memos. So having a bot that can synthesize all the different things they get in to create the memo, that's very, very hard. That we're not that close. Even having bots that can sit on an investment committee and vote, and so take in all the information from the deal and have a vote of whether we think it's a good deal or not. There are definitely funds that are playing with that and trying that and exploring that. I think we're probably a ways away from certainly a fund where the bot has a vote and people are, and that vote is decisive. Maybe having a bot that gives a vote and people, take that into a consideration as one factor they consider. I think we're probably not as far away from it. But yeah, that's kind of where we're going.
And Richard, this plays into your earlier comment on the large language model being kind of an intern. I think this is one of the main frustrations with large language models. And I think that, you take an intern, and a normal intern, you kind of train them and they become an analyst and then an associate. like the large language model framework that we have right now, in my opinion, is pretty rigid. There's this concept of pipeline, which I think of as kind of a 4-letter word, which, you take this kind of rigid set of, here are the steps you need to get to from inputs to outputs. And that's a very successful way to use large language models. So, you do some document processing, you ask the right questions, maybe you ask follow-up questions, and then you have a screen where the user kind of reviews things. And this thing where you kind of learn how to be kind of an analyst and learn how to be an associate, I think there is still very rigid. So, it can summarize information, but to analyze it, you kind of have to guide it to the benchmark. Here's what you should compare it to. Here's if it's high or low. And it's very stiff and algorithmic. And I think that there is a lot of pie in the sky effort in the community to do these kind of agent-based models where you kind of have just a bot that has, or a series of bots that have tools available to them, and they select the right tool and get to their own next step and then keep going until they get what they think is an answer. And that one is it's far out. So for the people watching this, if you think that you can train the intern to get to analyst, to get to associate, to get to VP, that is still a little ways out, which is good news for actual humans and bad news for, the goal of just having kind of, maximal efficiency, let's say.
Lisa, it's a great point. We've actually tried some of those agent approaches. So I was glad you brought that up. And I would say also the results have been somewhat mixed. So I think also, our results are, but the idea of, and again, for those who don't know what we're talking about here, the idea is if you take a problem, if you get asked a simple question, right, which is, what do we think, what does this business spend each year on this raw material, right? It can retrieve it and find the answer. But if you say, what is this company going to do if there's a shortage of this raw material or something like that, right? Which is a complicated question, right? That's hard to answer. That could have a lot of nuance to it. Then ideally, today, the bot's going to give some answer that's probably going to be wrong or incomplete at least, right? Or not that good. In theory, in an agent-centric world, right, you could get a lot more complicated, right? The agent you could start by spooling up an agent that's a sort of manager agent, right? That then says, okay, I'm going to break this problem down into 5 different subproblems of is there a substitute that we could use? Could we afford to pay more for it? Could we make less of that, postpone manufacturing of that product till later, right? And so you're going to come up with all these questions, right? And then for each of those, it's going to spool up a bot, and that bot then might spool up more bots, right? That are all going to try to pursue different tasks. And one bot's going to be a market expert, and one's going to become an operational expert, and right, they're all going to try to go answer these get down to the 3rd, 4th order questions, answer them, and then eventually the sort of manager bot is going to take all that and consolidate it and try to come up with an answer, right? And that's kind of the dream version of how it would work. And then they could answer that nuanced question and have gone to the level of detail that a human would go, or team of humans would go to answer it. Again, the reality today is that these systems, aren't terrible, much better than they were obviously 2 years ago, but they're not at a level yet where they really, you can just take that answer and you're done, right? There's a lot more to be done. I think there's a question of, so how do we get there, right? I think there's a question of one, the models themselves will improve just in terms of what they're capable of doing, but also adding more agentic features, right? So making the agents capable of just doing more stuff, right? Which will help make that work better. I suspect other people will come up with really complicated and sophisticated prompts that they build in that make those work better. And so there'll be third-party tools that kind of enable that. But that's sort of the dream. I think it's probably a couple years out before that's really working great. But that's kind of where some of the stuff is headed. And that's how you answer, by the way, that's how you put together the IC memo, right? Or that's how you have the voting company is eventually it does that, and it does that with 100 agents, and it spools them all together, and that's how you get it.
Great. I'm curious, what about on the portfolio management side in operational efficiency? Any examples that you both are seeing yet on the Portco side?
So, I mean, For portfolio management and from my side, it's really investing in private equity funds, other asset class funds, and then co-investments in secondaries. So it's a little bit different perspective than Richard has, but I would say that one goal is definitely reporting. So I think that you have LPs with hundreds of fund investments, and they have valuable quarterly reports coming to them every single quarter. And there's information in there about the operating performance of each of these companies that the GP kind of spends a lot of time on. And summarizing those down into, they just don't have, if you're a public pension, for example, you don't have the resources to read through 200 quarterly reports every single quarter. And so kind of being able to kind of ask your questions, say okay, how are the GPs feeling about interest rates? How are they feeling about the inflation environment? What are they thinking about kind of the prospects of IT or whatever, whatever your questions are, asking that to kind of, this long list of documents and getting kind of a good summary out of, what are my investment managers trying to communicate to me that, I just don't have capacity to parse as a single human. And so I think that's one area of just reporting that, it's just useful to be able to get the cross section of your portfolio. And it's been unattainable so far because you can only read so many documents.
So relevant both to IR, investor relations. You touched on that a little bit there. Richard, anything to add to that in terms of portco management or IR?
Yeah, well, I got a one on each, right? So on the IR, just still following the thread on IR, right? So Lisa's obviously talking about it from the LP side. From the GP side, obviously you have all these LPs constantly asking them various questions, and that takes a lot of time to answer those in a thorough way. I think that answering them using Gen AI to at least write drafts is an important use case that a lot of funds are excited about, right? Especially when they do a deal, they get these questionnaires from all the LPs involved in the deals that can have, hundreds of, have 100 plus questions on them, right? And the questions might be similar across questionnaires, but they're not identical enough that you can sort of really copy and paste. Gen AI can really help write a draft of answers to these and help and just allow them to be more efficient in communicating with LPs, which, today that's great because it saves the GPs a little time. In the future, that will be helpful, as Lisa's pointing out, because the LPs will be able to then know that the GPs can answer whatever question they want because they have Gen AI, and they can ask 300 questions instead of 100 and ask more detail and follow-ups and get to more nuance. And so there can be more communication between both parties, even if both of them are using robots to talk to each other. So that's one on the IR side. On the portfolio management side, one application, again, I want to say this is a little bit early days, but I've seen it working, so I believe in it, which is using Gen AI to power company performance dashboards is a really new cutting edge area that we've seen that's interesting. So as an example, at Bain, we have this company Pixis that we bought about 5 years ago that has a lot of interesting third party data. And one of the things we do is we provide dashboards to both PE funds, but also to portfolio companies and non-portfolio companies that show their company performance. And it's third-party data, so they can see their performance relative to peers, right? So they can see what's my market, and it's for B2C companies primarily. But you can see what's my market share in Dallas, and or you can see, what products of my competitors are people buying this week or whatever, right? And so you can see lots of interesting data that you don't normally have access to that can help you understand your business. As a PE owner, you may be less interested in those sort of nuanced operational questions, but you might want to have something flag, hey, if we lose a bunch of market share in your market, I get a note. So I know I should follow up and figure out what's going on. Or if we have above average growth somewhere, we should, same idea, right? So there's some help. Then what's really interesting now is you can use Gen AI in those dashboards, right? So you can actually type in with natural language and say, those types of questions and say, I'd like to see a report show a chart showing our market share in Dallas weekly over the last year. and you just type that, and then a minute later, boop, there's the chart right on the page. And the chart is always updating. So now if I come back in 2 weeks, I can see the next 2 weeks data. And that ability to just type what you want and see it has really helped. Like at a couple of the companies where we've deployed that, we've seen more people are using the dashboard. They're using it more frequently, right? They get more value from it because they don't have to know, if I want to see market share, I go to the 37th tab, right? They just can type it in, right? And so I think that kind of Gen AI driven reporting with sort of third party data could be really powerful for portfolio, for owners, because it can allow them to monitor their assets at a level of with the right level of depth, right? They can ask whatever question they want and see an answer. They can have Gen AI that flags stuff they're interested in, but then they don't have to get into the weeds when they don't want to. Like that I think feels interesting. Again, today, very small number of people are doing it, but over the next couple of years, it feels like it's bound to come.
These are great examples.
I would sorry, Eric, could I drill down into that IR example a little bit further? So, no, I like just a couple of things that we've noticed on our side. So we also, we get a lot of questions from investors as well, and being able to efficiently answer those is really important, and answer them kind of correctly in the right tone and, in a satisfying way. And one of the things that we found is that that's an area of very low-hanging fruit. Most people have kind of like a question answer bank where, like, anytime you've got a question from a client, you answered it in a good way, and then you save that answer so that you can use it in case there's a similar question later. Well, it turns out that, finding similar information is just really easy for large language models. Like finding, here's my new question, here's my old answers, find, the top three that look promising. You don't even need ChatGPT. You can use something even more basic than that. So I would say that, yeah, just like, even just finding an existing answer, which at least for our compliance department, they really like that. So if you start with an answer that you've already gotten compliance approval for, and is existing in your kind of database of answers, and then just added that one so that the compliance team can easily say, yes, this is okay. I think that's really low-hanging fruit for these large language models. And Richard, as you know, I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but like it's just an embedding, right? You just say like, is this similar to that? And then you rank them. And maybe you do a couple more steps to really convince yourself that it's similar. For us, a couple of those extra steps were, we have different asset classes. So if the question is about private equity versus private debt versus real assets, we just apply some filtering. So, you start by saying like, okay, this is a private equity question. And now I'm going to search for, the answers in that database. But yeah, I think that, in terms of answering questions and doing it in a way that compliance is happy with, there's actually like a lot of low-hanging fruit here.
That's a good segue with the mention of compliance and even, some of the challenges here with like pre-segmenting your search areas and things like that. I'm curious to shift the conversation just towards challenges. We've talked a lot about the advantages and the benefits, and in reality, we all know that this stuff isn't easy. I'm curious, maybe Richard, what have you been seeing in terms of challenges, whether it's, firms who are trying to adopt AI, what challenges do they have, or technological challenges?
Yeah, I think you can tell that there are some challenges because here we are 18 months or so after ChatGPT launched, and we're still talking about, very early use cases and things. So this isn't as easy as you would like it to be, of course. I think there's a couple of things. I think one thing I've seen at PE funds, just when they're, is, most of them are going to have to buy, not build, right? As we already discussed, because they don't have big teams. And you're talking about buying, not literally buying the company, but buying a technology, obviously, to use, as a vended solution. You're talking about very sensitive data. So the checks that they have to go through are very thorough. And so any vendor they're going to work with, it will take, it takes at least a couple of months to get comfortable to start using them. this is a real, I mean, and I think that's smart. Like, I'm not saying you shouldn't, obviously this data is very sensitive, that you should take all the necessary precautions, but it does slow things down because, it can take a couple of months to even get permission to just do a pilot, right? And then you do a pilot and you find out it's not that good. Well, now you're back to the drawing board and that's 3 months have gone by, right? And so it can just take a long time because of necessary compliance issues to just get going with things. And then the other piece is that I found, is even if you do have the stuff, it's not that easy to get people to use it. I mean, I think that, you often get on panels like this and you've got people like Lisa and myself who are huge believers in this technology and think it's really great and going to change the world and so forth. It's easy to forget that like most people do not spend all day playing with this stuff and don't go on to ChatGPT 6 times a day to do something or whatever, right? Most people, this isn't something they're spending a lot of time thinking about. And so even if you come to them and say, I've got this new solution, it's great, it's going to save you a ton of time, it's going to be way better, it's really great. They're not going to necessarily jump to use it. And they may try it once. And to Lisa's point, not be happy with the output. They may look at the output and say, well, this isn't perfect. Like I couldn't send this to my boss, right? And so like, forget it, I'm not going to use it, right? And so that problem happens a lot. And so actually getting adoption of these things is quite hard and requires a lot of persistence. You need to have what we call a Bain, a sort of sponsorship spine, meaning you have people at the top of the company that are pushing it, but also at every level, you have some champions that are helping push things out. I've seen some funds do things like hackathons to try to get people immersed in the technology and using it, which I think is a great idea. I've seen firms, literally have like associates who are just going to like go sit in a partner's desk next to them and just say, here's how you use this. Like, I'm going to show you how to use it and show you how it saves you time. And then just go in that sort of hand-to-hand combat, one person at a time to kind of get them to use it. I mean, so there's different approaches, but it's hard to get people to change their behavior, especially people who are busy and have done things a certain way for a long time. And that's no different from any other new technology, but it's a reality of making this stick.
Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely. I mean, any technology, really, people are busy. And so, if you can save them time today, they like that. If you can only save them time in 3 months, they like that less. So I think that's definitely a challenge. I would say like even more basic for us, like one of the most basic use cases is just scraping data. Like you have, I don't know, some earnings or revenue in a report somewhere and you want to pull it out. And based on the way that we're using the technology now, and I think this will change over the next, 6 months or so, like if it's in a combination of text, tables, and charts, and since I think GPs will watch this, like you guys are such special unicorns, like snowflakes, like every single report has just a different format and you have like, 3 layers of headings in your columns and so on. So if, you have a chart and a text and a table that like combined give you the right answer, that's just very difficult to get the data out of. And so in that case, like we, as well as our clients, would pester you guys, right? We would call internal relations and say like, hey, we need this information. And then that becomes annoying for everyone in the system. So yeah, I think that'll change in a bit. But right now that combination of formats is just difficult for the way that we're accessing the technology. And the accuracy problem, I think, to Richard's point, like if it were perfectly accurate and just gave you the right answer and then you could just kind of send an email to the next guy, that's perfect, but it's not perfectly accurate. You do need some degree of quality assurance. And that means that you have to have thoughtful software around like how you're using just the basic large language models. And that gets to the third challenge of vendors. They're not there yet. So you can't just go out and say like, I want these use cases, give me the off-the-shelf version. I don't think we're quite there yet. Richard, curious to learn more about the knowledge management solutions that are kind of growing out there. But from what I've seen, it's still kind of a do-it-yourself world. If you have kind of a specific use case that, is tailored to your business model that you want to use, then yeah, vendors are not quite there yet.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much. It's been a super fun conversation. I feel like we could talk about this stuff all day, and I'm sure between the three of us, we could go down a lot of rabbit holes and get quite technical. But that's going to conclude our conversation for today. I would like to thank everybody online who are joining us, and I'd especially like to thank our panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us and have this engaging conversation. If you'd like to share this webinar with your colleagues, we'll be sending a link shortly. All of our webinars are available on our website, Ontra AI, under the Resources tab. And thank you again, and thank you all for joining us.